Voluntaryist Academy is an educational platform dedicated to the principles of non-aggression, self-ownership, and the ethical philosophy of voluntarism. Here, we reject the mythology of political authority and embrace the timeless truth that all human interactions should be grounded in consent and moral integrity. Through rigorous study, in-depth courses, and accessible materials, Voluntaryist Academy equips individuals with the tools to critically examine the foundations of coercive systems and to replace them with voluntary, peaceful alternatives rooted in natural law. Whether you are new to these ideas or looking to deepen your understanding, Voluntaryist Academy provides a structured path to intellectual freedom, ethical consistency, and personal sovereignty. Welcome. Explore the curriculum, challenge false assumptions, learn to live free. I'm your host, James Cordiner. Been a while since I've done an actual live stream. We've been doing some pre-recorded interviews lately. Welcome to Voluntaryist Academy. If you're unfamiliar with this, or if you're, whatever, it's great to be here. Great to have you guys listening. Thank you very much. I want to address specifically the people listening on the RSS feed. I want you guys to be able to come on over to the YouTube channel and give the videos a thumbs up and do all the subscribing over there. I also want to direct you guys to the website, voluntaristacademy.com, where you can catch up on the show and get all the resources that I have on the resources page. And you can support the show through various means of cryptocurrencies. And you can also support the show by becoming a member, or a sponsor, as I like to call it. And that is really affordable. $3 a month for the first 30 people that sign up. 2 of those spots are gone already. And then for everyone else, $5 a month. And become a VIP sponsor, and you get one-on-one calls with me, and you get exposed to my unmatched care and honesty. I have a lot of life experience. I've lived a weird life, faced a lot of challenges along the way, and I'm prepared to help some people maybe with their challenges. So if you'd like to do that, that's $50 a month. For only 10 people, I'm only going to take on 10 clients like that. But everyone else, we get a Discord. We get a Discord chat room. We also would be able to participate in what I'm hoping to have a bi-weekly town hall, where us as a group get to come together and share experiences and form a vibrant community of like-minded individuals who are interested in discussing the philosophy of voluntarism and exploring the different ideas of personal sovereignty and bringing some of this philosophy and the ideas into the real world in practical means and in a practical setting. There is no difference between the $3 a month and $5 a month options. It's just, if you get in now, you can get the $3 a month for the first 30 people. And so we're also through the Discord going to be able to do call-ins to the live streams after the material has been presented. Tonight's material is a continuation of our Men Against the State series. And we're going to be getting to that in just a moment. So back to me here. I'm going to be giving a presentation at an online conference coming up in February. And that presentation will be titled Voluntarism and the Foundations of Freedom. So look forward to that. More on that in the coming weeks or in the coming months. And I'll make sure to be promoting the ever-living crap out of that festival, online conference rather, not festival. And it's going to be a speech, just as the title implies, about voluntarism and what I'm calling the foundations of freedom or liberty. Actually, no, it's foundations of freedom. It's kind of alliteration, kind of rolls off the tongue a little bit. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun the last month, maybe a little bit longer than a month since we've done the Men Against the States series. But I'm hoping to, like I said last week, I'm hoping to wrap this up by the end of the month of November. And then depending on my interview schedule, I've got a couple things lined up, but depending on my interview schedule, this book behind me right over my shoulder, if you can see it, it's called The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. We'll be hopefully taking a deep dive into that, and possibly some other things as well, where maybe I just go on a rant or whatever. I've been kind of writing some things, and I got a lot to say. But I wanted to finish this up, and I also want to make sure everybody out there knows that I haven't forgot about the Socratic Logic series either. I'm hoping to be able to catch up on all of these things in the coming months. I'm also putting the APB out there for anybody interested in helping this channel grow, and you want to get in on the ground floor. It's not a paying position yet, but if you can come on board and help grow the channel, i.e. making clips and helping me with social media promotion on social media, that would be great. And we can, we can come to an agreement of it would be a volunteer position for now. I'm hoping that we can start turning something around here pretty soon. Not to sound desperate or whatever, but yeah, times are tough over here. But we're going to keep pressing forward, and we're going to keep getting this information out because it's important. And the information that I present, my podcast will always be free, but I do make offers to make sure that people that would like to support me have a way to do that. And I would like very much for a little bit of support. And but I'll keep doing this until I'm blue in the face or until they shut off the electricity. And so without any further ado, I think we can get into the material that I wanted to present this evening, which is chapter 8 of Men Against the State by James J. Martin. And we're going to be talking about Benjamin R. Tucker tonight. And this is the first part of 2 parts on Benjamin Tucker that we're going to be covering in the next couple weeks. Hopefully tonight and next week, and then we'll be done with this and we can move on. Okay, so here we go. Benjamin R. Tucker and the Age of Liberty, Part 1. Section 1, Intellectual Heir of Native or Anarchist Traditions. The name Benjamin R. Tucker has of necessity appeared repeatedly in the discussion of the later years of the pioneer Native American anarchists. A full account of none of his predecessors is possible without bringing in the circumstances under which contact with Tucker occurred, since he was to become the synthesizer of their varied thought and eventually to acquire the reputation of being the most talented speaker and writer of the entire group. Much of his anarchist thought, although derived almost entirely from others, has received the stamp of originality from those unacquainted with the mature influences of his young manhood. While his contributions as a publisher, translator, and literary figure between 1875 and 1908 have been generally overlooked. To understand the imposing prominence of Tucker in the American anarchist propaganda picture during the period of its greatest height, a generous measure of consideration must be given the occasion of his first acquaintances with anti-government thought and the men whom he cited as the sources of most of his ideas. Tucker was born in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts, a town adjoining New Bedford, April 17th, 1854. He was the son of parents described as radical Unitarians of comfortable circumstances. After attending Friends Academy in New Bedford, he went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he spent 3 years in desultory study. He became successively a prohibitionist, a woman suffragist, a supporter of the 8-hour movement, and a religious radical. It was in the pages of the Index and the Investigator, both published locally, that he first learned of materialism and atheism. By 1872, his interest in engineering studies lapsed in favor of politics, where he founded a Greeley Brown Club in New Bedford while still 3 years too young to vote himself. The year 1872 brought with it another experience, however, which ended his political aspirations and commenced his association with anarchism. At the spring meeting of the New England Labor Reform League in Boston, he met Josiah Warren and William B. Greene for the first time. And a lifelong career as an anti-statist thinker was begun. In November of the same year, Tucker began corresponding with Ezra Heywood. Articles by Tucker published in The Word brought an acquaintance with this prominent intellectual. Through this paper, primarily, he became familiar with Warren's labor exchange and labor theory of value, Greene's free mutual banking, J.K. Ingalls' land occupation and use, and Heywood's intense literary style. To the ideas of these Americans, he added something from Proudhon, Bakunin, Max Steiner, and Herbert Spencer, and produced a redoubtable amalgam which proved almost impenetrable through a stormy 27-year period of exposition in the pages of Liberty. In addition, he became friendly with Warren, Spooner, and Greene despite considerable disparity in age. Tucker later called his paper the foremost organ of Josiah Warren's doctrines and acclaimed Spooner, quote, one of the profoundest political philosophers that ever added to the knowledge of mankind, end quote. He took no credit for originality in his espousal of free banking. Quote, he said, I am indebted to Colonel Greene's Mutual Banking more than any other single publication for such knowledge as I have of the principles of finance, the most compact, satisfactory, keen, and clear treatise upon mutual money extant. End quote. Ingalls was probably the first of the Americans to write for Tucker under his own name, while the expressions of both Andrews and Heywood are present in Tucker's writings. Those of the latter, especially as the result of close publishing association. Tucker's first public discussion of his newly adopted beliefs dealt with the Warren-Greene theory of interest and money. It was, strangely enough, carried in the pages of Francis Abbott's Religious Index, with the editor himself furnishing the formidable opposition. Although the controversy was a matter almost wholly foreign to the paper, it lasted nearly the entire year of 1873, with little observable result except the introduction of Tucker to a type of polemic, which was to become extremely popular in his own journal a decade later. Tucker applied the Warrenite fundamental that in any exchange of labor or its products, exact equivalence must be sought in the transaction to the act of lending money. Using the term interest in the ordinary sense, quote, a sum of money paid to the lender in return for the benefit conferred upon the borrower, end quote, he maintained that, quote unquote, cost to lender was all that could equitably or, quote unquote, morally be taken. He later came to label interest taking as a crime, as did Heywood. Tucker adopted the latter's fondness for quoting biblical remonstrances against the practice and continually upbraided ministers for failing to stress such social teachings as of the scriptures. Under the influence of Greene, Tucker made the first several trips to Europe in August of 1874. Returning in mid-January of the next year after spending some time in the study of Proudhon's writings in both published and manuscript form. With this background, Haywood engaged him as associate editor of The Word in April 1875, and a long career as an anarchist writer was fully commenced. His direct association with Haywood lasted until December of 1876, during which period he attracted particular attention by two actions. One of these was his quixotic repetition of the celebrated refusal of Henry David Thoreau to pay taxes, a symbolic gesture in the attempt to illuminate his intellectual opposition to taxation by compulsion. On August 9th of 1875, Tucker publicly announced his refusal to pay the poll tax of the town of Princeton, Massachusetts, the home of Haywood, in the publishing office of The Word. Later in the month, he was incarcerated by the Worcester County Jail for doing so, but his release took place in short order under anticlimactic conditions. This was his only clash with the machinery of the state during a long period of literary attack upon it. His sympathizers wrote of the incident as foolhardy and consequence of youthful and impetuous idealism. If you guys want to learn more about Henry David Thoreau, I read his civil disobedience essay on the channel. You can go find that now. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's continue with the reading. Of much more importance to the anarchist element was the announcement in January of 1876 of the publication of Tucker's translation of Proudhon's famous What is Property? An octavo tome of 500 pages, it was a serious and worthy contribution for a young man of 21 years of age, and ended his misgivings as to the attention accorded him due to his youth. Henceforth, his stature among the anti-statists grew until he became the acknowledged literary power among them. Tucker's restlessness and dissatisfaction with Haywood's policy in conducting The Word resulted in his resignation in December of 1876. He charged that Haywood was devoting too much time and space to love reform and not enough to labor reform. Quote, "I wish to give myself first and emphatically to the advocacy of justice to labor," end quote, announced Tucker as he served his connections. There's a typo on this. It says tucked, not says Tucker. Anyways, Tucker, as he severed his connections with Haywood, with the Haywood Group, and began plans for his own venture, the Radical Review, the following month. The Radical Review was an undertaking of wide scope and intentions. Its policy was definitely extended in making public the political and economic tenets of American anarchism. And during its short life, it became the one organ in which the prominent pioneer expositors were united. Andrews, Spooner, Green, Haywood, and Ingalls all contributed articles of importance and value. Tucker had serious literary ambitions for his journal as well, and a group of other personalities became attached to the fortunes of the Radical Review during its brief period of publication. Begun in May of 1877, the final number came out in February of 1878. This was probably due more to a personal decision on the part of Tucker than to failure. Ezra Haywood's first conviction under the Comstock laws took place during the summer of 1878. Tucker, anxious to do his part in the struggle to keep the radical periodical press alive, took charge of The Word in his absence. Moving its editorial and publication offices to Cambridge, he directed its fortunes from there from August 1878 until Haywood's release from prison late in December of the same year. In the meantime, Tucker's own venture languished and it never resumed publication under his name or management. We covered Ezra Haywood couple in this series already. He's a part of this series, I think. I can't remember exactly what part, maybe 6 or 7. For over 2 years thereafter, he remained inactive on the propaganda line, although engaged in journalism in Boston as a means of livelihood. The observation that such former stalwarts as Andrews and Haywood were straying away from the quote-unquote plumb line may have impressed upon him the need for a periodical devoted entirely to the dissemination of anarchism rather than every shade of unorthodoxy. At any rate, on August 6, 1881, the first issue of Tucker's famous broadsheet Liberty appeared, accompanied by a statement of principle and an editorial policy which must have appealed to all the extreme individualist anarchists on his first mailing list. So, cited from the first issue of Liberty, published on August 6th of 1881, we have this. It may be well to state at the outset of this journal that this journal will be edited to suit its editor, not its reader or readers. He hopes that what suits him will suit them, but if not, it will make no difference. No subscriber or body of subscribers will be allowed to govern his course, dictate his policy, or prescribe his methods. Liberty is published for the very definite purpose of spreading certain ideas, and no claim will be admitted or on any pretext of freedom of speech to waste its limited space in hindering attainment of that object. That's kind of like what I do here at Voluntaryist Academy. It is true that an examination of Liberty during its long period of publication reveals that this ideal was only partially realized. Tucker proved to be easily stimulated into argumentation, and numerous pages of Liberty were henceforth to be devoted to disputes of many kinds. Much of it was wrangling and hair-splitting of little or no value, which in the later days gave the paper the tenor of a debating society. Despite its shortcomings, however, Liberty preserved sufficient vitality to become the longest-lived of any radical periodical of economic or political nature in the nation's history, and certainly one of the world's most interesting during the past 2 centuries. All right, so part 2, theoretical anarchism matured. The crystallization of anarchist thought, which took place during the period of Tucker's prominence as the literary focal point of the native, small n, American demonstration, can be found illustrated in both political and economic senses throughout Liberty. Tucker himself, however, left no doubt as to which aspect of the struggle against the state he considered the most important. Production, distribution, and exchange were all subjects of long study on his part, and he came to the conclusion that the political and social structures of American culture could better be dealt with after economic problems had been settled. Quote, liberty, to be effective, must find its first application in the realm of economics, end quote, is something he declared. And on this matter of economic basis of life, he drummed continually. Tucker's contribution to the thought of his associated anti-statists was his articulate presentation of the concept of the 4 monopolies which he saw as productive of all the evils of society. So the anarchist approach was similar to the general theory of many-branched socialist movement in that it postulated the existence of an element of surplus wealth. Queried Tucker in his first issue, quote, somebody gets the surplus wealth that labor produces and does not consume. Who is the somebody, end quote. After a rapid survey of the varied means of obtaining property, quote-unquote property, during which such methods as work, gift, discovery, gambling, beggary, and the violent or forceful means of appropriation as individuals were all dismissed as affecting the accumulation of but a minor portion of the world's wealth. Tucker, by his process of elimination, inexorably arrived at the culprit, whom he labeled the usurer. Said Tucker, quote, there are 3 forms of usury: interest on money, rent of land and houses, and profit in exchange. Whoever is in receipt of any of these is a usurer. Furthermore, under existing conditions, there hardly lived a single soul who did not come under this classification in one way or another. Not only were bankers, manufacturers, merchants, and landlords usurers under this definition, but so were all working men who placed their savings in interest-bearing positions, either in banks or elsewhere. Anyone who, quote, exchanges his labor for more than an equivalent, end quote, was a, quote unquote, usurer. But those guilty of this and other economic peculations previously listed did not equally benefit. Tucker observed, only the chief usurers accumulate in agricultural and thickly settled countries, the landlord. In industrial and commercial countries, the bankers. Those are the somebodies who swallow up the surplus wealth. End quote. And that was in, the first issue of Liberty in 1881. To Tucker, these were not the effects of natural economic processes, but the byproducts of privilege. Privilege derived from the possession of power and enjoyed by a few. The source of the power he traced to monopoly, a term which he defined in relation to competition. This in turn rested on his interpretations of cost and value, or in his own terms, the reward of labor, which was twofold. Those folds are scientific and actual. In a state of absolutely free competition, these would be practically identical. Quote, the product of an equal amount of equally arduous labor, end quote. And that was from Liberty, issue number 3. From this analysis stemmed Tucker's definition of a monopolist, which was Tucker defined a monopolist as any person, corporation, or institution whose right to engage in any given pursuit of life is secured either wholly or partially by any agency whatsoever, whether the nature of things or the force of events or the decree of arbitrary power, against the influence of competition. That's pretty accurate. I'd say we probably still have a problem with that today. Moving on. Despite the leeway granted in this statement, he did not hesitate in locating the monopolies and the sources thereof, which created the grave dislocations of economic society. Here, he entered his concept of the four monopolies in the creation of which the state was, quote, the chief of sinners, end quote, and two of which were by far the most evil. He says the monopoly of land and the monopoly of credit were the most evil. The other two, the monopoly of the tariffs and the monopoly of patents and copyrights, were frankly state conducted, he said, and completed the process in enabling the extraction of profit in exchange. With reference to the first pair of monopolies, Tucker was very explicit. He said, ground rent exists only because the state stands by to collect it and to protect land titles rooted in force and or fraud. Otherwise, the land would be free to all, and no one could control more than he used. Interest and house rent exist only because the state grants to a certain class of individuals and corporations the exclusive privilege of using its credit and theirs as a basis for the issuance of circulatory or circulating currency. Otherwise, credit would be free to all, and money brought under the law of competition would be issued at cost. Thus, he concluded that, quote, the usurer is the somebody, end quote, and that the, quote, state is his protector, end quote. The only only the abolition of the power to create such monopolies of land, money, patents, and copyrights would ever make it possible for the laborers to retain the full return from their production. Tucker's writings never neglected this program, the fight against the state as the backbone of monopoly, continuing in the pages of Liberty for over 25 years and under a number of different forms. For this reason, he rejected the reform fight against trusts at a later time, declaring that the trusts existed through the agency of legality in the first place, and confining his remedy to the suggestion that the laws creating trusts be repealed instead of new laws being passed to neutralize the evils resulting from the previous ones. Of these monopolies, Tucker singled out his particular attention and lifelong attack, that of money, or the centralization of the financial system by the federal government. Utilizing the ideas of Green and Spooner, he evolved an argument which differed little from theirs, though more blunt in its phrasing. The first point of attack should be the power of legal privileged capital to increase without work. And as the monopoly of the issue of money is the chief bulwark of this power, Liberty turns its heaviest guns upon that. State and national banks were looked upon as, quote, law-created and law-protected monopolies. And equally objectionable to the advocates of free banking, whose chief aim was to secure the right of all wealth to monetization without prior conversion into some particular form of wealth limited in amount and without being subjected to ruinous discounts. He fought the gold standard just as bitterly as had his predecessors, asserting at one time that it was the king of commodities and a privileged product, and that free trade was incomprehensible in a world using it universally. He said, the nation which absorbs it, that is, the nation who exports largely exceeds its imports, will surely govern the world, end quote. Tucker realized that there existed stiff penalties on the statute books to prevent just what he was advocating. In fact, he had himself participated in an effort to have that of Massachusetts repealed while associated with Haywood, to no avail. However, he kept the issue before his readers and critics constantly, despite his failure to suggest a means of bypassing the state. Writings on finance filled the major part of many single issues of the paper. In fact, little lessening took place in the prominence of the money question among the matters before discussion until the mid-90s, that's the 1890s, by which time about everything constructive on the subject had been expressed. Benjamin Tucker argued that everything not labor which played a part in production was capital, and money, being one of these things, was capital. Every kind of wealth had a right to exercise its natural and legitimate monetary function, he said, and the fact that money was arbitrarily limited in amount was the cause of practically all existing quote-unquote social injustices. The arbitrary decision as to the actual volume of money acted to keep its total amount below the demand for it, and thus tended to raise the rate of interest. He did not attack the measure of standard or of value. He did not attack the measure or standard of value. Without one arrived at through force, selection, or mutual agreement, it mattered not which. The idea of money was, quote, not only impossible, but unthinkable, end quote. Security might not be essential to the institution of a money system, he granted, but, quote, it was an essential of steady production and stable commerce, end quote. The use of insecure money was a sure road to general bankruptcy. He said, when products can be had for the writing of promises and the idea gets abroad that such promises are good money, whether kept or not, the producers are very likely to stop producing. The ultimate of all this, then, would be the existence of many more claims upon production in the form of money than there were products to buy with it. The need of evidence of security for money through some system of organized credit did not require sanction of some particular commodity as the sole medium with which to keep with which to keep the promises. Subscribing to the Green ideas, William B. Green, his ideas, Tucker thought it perfectly sound to retain the gold or silver dollar, arrived at through agreement on an arbitrary weight in ounces as a standard. However, the idea of monetizing other commodities with relation to their values as expressed in specie dollar remained topmost in his considerations. He said, what the Friends of Free Money are fighting for is the right both of individuals and of cooperators to issue money when and as they choose. And what they are fighting against is the laws which in any way make it impossible for either individuals or cooperators to exercise this right. This, and nothing else, is the free money theory. The volume theorists with whom Tucker debated maintained an increase in the amount of money by mutual banking was no solution. As the volume increased, its purchasing power decreased, the ratio of aggregate purchasing power of money to commodities in exchange remaining unchanged. The Tuckerite mutualists rejoined that such a stand assumed that the volume increase took place at the expense of the standard of value, the backing becoming debased as more money was introduced into the economy. But mutual banking would have no such result. The standard of value would remain the specie dollar. Only other property than specie would be monetized at the same standard and measure. Therefore, the purchasing power of the gold and silver dollars would not be affected. Tucker theorized that the increased distribution would facilitate the distribution of wealth, and the increased distribution would stimulate the demand for more wealth. The increased demand would encourage the increase in production and therefore an increase in the abundance of capital. This increase in the abundance of capital would tend to lower interest rates, quote, up to the point where interest disappears entirely, end quote. And that quote can be found in Liberty, issue number 7, published July 26th of 1890. I do not read all the footnotes or references, but if you want to read all the footnotes and references, you can get your own copy of this PDF at voluntaryistacademy.com/resources. And while you're there, sign up to be a member. He never lost sight of his primary purpose, the destruction of the ability of capital to return to its owner an income without the application of labor by its owner. Capital was already, quote-unquote, rewarded, he declared, merely by its ownership. If the owner was to lend it and the borrower, quote-unquote, damages, destroys, or consumes a portion or all of it, then it was the right of the owner to have that fully restored. Any surplus beyond its return intact, on the other hand, was payment for a day's work a second time, for he defined capital as a day's work already done and embodied in the form of tangible property. Tucker did not censure the taking of interest as such, but with Proudhon believed that if the power to take it were extended to all men equally, it would eventually cancel itself out. Its persistence was due, therefore, to the fact that it continued to be a burden upon a portion of society unable to make use of it through the location of the money system in the hands of a monopoly by the state, and which free banking would shatter. Tucker's philosophical and political ideas covered areas which previously had been little touched upon by his predecessors, in contrast to his convictions relating to money, credit, and banking. A deep strain of religion had remained in the conclusions of all the prominent previous exponents excepting Warren. That's Josiah Warren. Covered him way earlier on in the series here. Tucker, reflecting the influence of Michael Bakunin and other Continentals, brought the issue out resolutely in asserting that anarchism, as an impetus toward the realization of liberty and freedom, necessarily had to conduct the fight against authority everywhere. He saw the church and state as twin forces whose outlines remained, even in those who felt no qualms in making the most outspoken specific criticisms of them in operation in particular areas of human society. He said, the purpose of liberty, boiled down to its ultimate essence, is the abolition of authority. And he is correct. The abolition of authority is the same as saying the abolition of slavery. It's the same thing. Okay, you have authority over one person in your life, and that's you. That's it. That's even going. That's not even. Let's not even, muddy the waters here with getting into all sorts of green language and the language of the birds and everything like that. You hear the word authority. Yeah, you know what it means. You really only have authority over one person, and that's you. He summarized the purpose of liberty, boiled down to its ultimate essence, is the abolition of authority. He summarized, and no headway would be made toward this goal as long as there remained the belief that authoritarian institutions of some kind were necessary. This is what Larkin Rose wrote about in his book called The Most Dangerous Superstition. The belief in authority. Let's do a brief aside here, shall we? The belief in authority is the greatest superstition, okay? The government isn't real. It's not real. Sure, the buildings are real, the politicians are real, the things they write down on pieces of paper are real, but the organization itself isn't actually something that exists in nature. Human beings are we organize things, sure, but when we do it according to natural law, then you're not violating anybody's rights and you're not making anything up. So yes, we can go and touch those buildings, and yes, like the weapons that they use to keep everybody in line, all of these things are very real, but the belief in authority is just that. It's only a belief. And that's what they get their power from. That's why I call government an egregore. Back to the reading. All right. Church and state he conceived as a double-headed monster, which maintained itself by keeping the masses of the people, quote unquote, drugged with the superstitious reverence for the fiction of authority. I think maybe Larkin Rose really kind of likes, I think Larkin Rose really took a liking to Benjamin Tucker, probably. It was his conviction that the fight against the church was being won, but that its power was being absorbed by the state, with even more serious consequences. Of the three forms of authority, which threatened liberty, that of the Christian churches and their offshoot autocracy was the less to be feared, and parliamentarism and the authoritarian socialism of Karl Marx, the more dangerous. It was the latter too that he observed the transference of worship from the supernatural to the organs of the state. He said, it is human authority that hereafter is to be dreaded, and the state, its organ, that in the future is to be dreaded. Those who have lost their faith in gods only to put it in governments, those who have ceased to be church worshippers only to become state worshippers, those who have abandoned pope for king or czar, and priest for president or parliament, have indeed changed their battleground, but none the less are foes of liberty still. Thus, Tucker, finding the core authoritarianism laid deep in the organs of theocracy, came to the conclusion that for his own time, the emphasis had changed. He said, "This century's battle is with the state." So this century's battle is with the state was his blunt estimation of the issue. Like Spooner and Warren, he repudiated the idea of society as possessing personality. He said, society is not a person or a thing, but a relation, and a relation can have no rights. Society consisted of individuals, and only individuals possessed rights. The greatest right he thought men might hold was liberty, equally held by each. Equal liberty, he explained, means the largest amount of liberty compatible with equality and mutuality of respect on the part of individuals living in society for their respective spheres of action. Tucker felt that the basis of anarchism rested on this concept, which he described elsewhere as the greatest amount of liberty compatible with equality of liberty, the fundamental law of social expediency. Under contact with Steiner's teachings had convinced him the concept of natural rights was false, and contract a far more satisfactory basis upon which to erect a sound human social system. Of the prominent American anarchist writers, Tucker was the most careful in defining his terms, especially the expressions the state and government. He said, the anarchist defines government as invasion, nothing more or less, he stated flatly, while considering the impasse resulting from critics failing to understand anarchist terminology. He goes on to say, protection against invasion, then, is the opposite of government. Anarchists, in favoring the abolition of government, favor the abolition of invasion, not protection against invasion. Granting the right of individuals and voluntary associations the right to resist invasive behavior on the part of others, he continued, did not imply sanction of the state as one of these associations. On the contrary, anarchists everywhere saw the state only as a compulsory, usurpatory institution. He says, whose real purposes are offense and invasion, an institution to which all are forced to belong and which all are compelled to support. The philosophy of equal liberty as advanced by anarchists did not preclude regulation, but regulation which might be thought necessary should come from selection and voluntary assent. The security of life and property, which, said Tucker, appeared to be pretext under which government theoretically was established, actually served to invite the circumvention of the normal processes of nature by the utilization of artificial expedients. Here he made a distinction at a later time between voluntary contracts and the assumption of authority and exercise of power on the understanding that consent had been tendered. It was his conviction that society merely reflected the general intercourse of individuals in what he chose to call experimental associations, and that it was and would continue to remain very fluid, depending upon whether or not artificial intervention took place. When it did, he sought its expression through the exercise of authority, and this, said Tucker, in its organized phase, was government. The reduction in liberty resulting from this change in the conduct of of affairs was inevitably increased. The most lamentable spectacle today, he observed, is the short-sighted reformer attempting to secure greater liberty by advocating the method of greater authority, more intervention, more government. Before the state or its visible element, the government could dissociate from its long-established role of coercive agent. It had to abandon what Tucker called the primary act of invasion, the collection of taxes by force. This act, along with the legal sanction granted monopoly development, composed the primary invasive practices of the state, and when both were abandoned as policies, then the people of all countries could look forward to a change in social conditions, far more efficiently protective against invasion than any machinery of restraint. The abolition of compulsory taxation would mean the abolition of the state as well, Tucker asserted, and the form of society succeeded would be on the line of a voluntary defensive institution, prevented from becoming invasive through threats of deprivation of contributions from its members. Thus, he demanded of the members of the group would act as a device for keeping down the scope of its organization and make difficult the growth of agencies within itself vying for power. In the matter of taxation, Tucker from the beginning advised a program of resistance to payment in an effort to determine the extent to which the government would go in the process of collection. It was his conviction that if 1/5 of any given nation's people were to resist taxation, the cost of collection would be greater than the remaining 4/5 would consent to pay, and thus bring its conduct to a crisis. Any other course of behavior than passive resistance was frowned on, however. The old concept of spontaneous revolution and armed resistance was outmoded in the new era of military discipline. Improved firearms and artillery relegated all this to the past. In fact, he was unable to conceive any force succeeding other than that of passive resistance by inoffensive people, refraining from providing even the provocation of public demonstrations. In fact, Tucker was not concerned with the abolition of the existing state, either in his own land or elsewhere. His preoccupation was with the concept of the state as an institution, and he became more and more convinced that it never would be disturbed by such measures as armed rebellion. His concern was with the creation of some considerable measure and solid weight of absolute and well-grounded disbelief in it as an institution. In its absence, an existing state might be overthrown, but another was sure to rise in its place. And this would be perfectly natural due to the fact that the belief in its necessity would remain undamaged by mere demonstration of force. The job of the anarchist, said Tucker, was to create a public sentiment, rendering the collection of taxes or any other act construed as invasion, either extremely difficult or impossible. The state was an instrument of aggression, and its demise would be brought about only by individuals who, by their various acts of non-cooperation and obstruction, could, quote, succeed in stripping the state of its invasive powers, end quote. This, said Tucker, was the very best any anarchist might hope to bring out. Tucker was as convinced of the ineffectiveness of the ballot as he was of the bayonet and bullet. Even Spooner did not exceed him in his depreciation of the system of government by majority rule. No people should delegate power of any dimension which could not be revoked by any interested individual. Quote, personal government is the only true government, he declared. The laws of a majority might be fully as destructive to liberty as those of a royal tyrant. The people living under a system of majority legislation should not be blind to the fact, he pointed out, that the thing done was not absolved by the form of doing. Tucker held that boss rule was the inevitable outcome of the voting process, and its continuation merely perpetuated the very evils of its reformers sought to check. The anarchist could not countenance the principle that the majority might rule the minority through the ballot box. The oppression housed in ballot boxes is the same deadly genius that lurks in the palace. Pronounced the new intellectual leader of the Native American, small n, Native American anti-statists. Furthermore, persons securing power through the ballot were no more immune to arbitrary exercise of that power than any other. If any single reason for Tucker's opposition to the voting procedure stood out, it was the conviction that the office corrupted the man, and that all those performing the function of governing resembled each other within a short time, regardless of the principles entertained by one or the other prior to taking office. Of the many types of criticism which he received during the dissemination of his convictions, Tucker was the most vulnerable to those which reproached him for his program of destructive criticism, accusing him of offering no suggestions in the way of a substitute for the existing system of government which he so abominated. Of many well-conceived replies, the following is characteristic. Now, so far from, Tucker says, now so far from not offering anything in the place of what is now falsely called government, we have something very tangible to offer, something very rational, practical, and easy of application. We offer cooperation. We offer non-compulsive organization. We offer associative combination. We offer every possible method of voluntary social union by which men and women may act together for the furtherance of well-being. In short, we offer voluntary scientific socialism in the place of the present compulsory unscientific organization which characterizes the state and all of its ramifications. Man, I really wish they didn't have to use that word socialism. Anywho, let's continue. There were two methods of government, said Tucker. One was that of drivership, which is the coercive conduct of the state enforcing the individual where he did not willingly wish to go. The other was the anarchist method of leadership, introducing the individual towards the quote-unquote goal of a ideal civilization through persuasion and attraction. All suggested reorganization of society fell within these two broad categories. Government, anarchism, invasion are used as equivalent terms. Whoever invades, individual or state, governs and is an anarchist. Whoever defends against invasion, individual or voluntary association, opposes government and is an anarchist. Under Benjamin Tucker's direction, then, we find a synthesis of the many strains of objection to government voiced by his predecessors and teachers, with the accent placed heavily upon the economic factors responsible for buttressing the strength of arms of government. Two aims of anarchist activity. the abolition of compulsory taxation, and the abolition of legally protected money and land monopolies form the main theme of his critical writing, and of nearly 50 associates, resulting in the production of an astonishing volume of literature for over 3 decades, summarized Tucker on behalf of his compatriots. He says, "The anarchists believe that the greater part, if not all, of the necessity for the existence of the state is the result of an artificial limitation of the freedom of civil society, and that the completion of industrial freedom may one day so harmonize individuals that will no longer be necessary to provide a guarantee of political freedom. It is undeniable that the most important freedoms, those without which all other freedoms are little or no avail, the freedom of banking and the freedom to take possession of unoccupied land, exist nowhere in the civilized world. That the existing state is unquestionably based upon a compulsory tax that is itself a denial of equal freedom, and is daily adding to ponderous volumes of statutes, the bulk of which are either sumptuary or meddlesome in character or devised in the interest of privilege or monopoly." Okay, so this is section 3. It's called Tucker, the Radicals, and Reform. Liberty, which is Tucker's publication. Liberty, under the editorship of Tucker, was a vehicle for many things besides the precise definition of anarchism and its aims. As the organ of a segment of intellectual radicalism of more than ordinary articulation, it carried much material of both sympathetic and critical nature, referring to other portions of the whole movement for economic change after 1880. Thus, Tucker's writings furnish many illuminations of the anarchist attitude toward the various radical groups of his day. The Social Democrats, Nihilists, Socialists, Communists, single taxers, as well as the labor unions and lesser-known fragments of reform sentiment. A study of the relations between Tucker and these other groups illustrates the development of divergent paths as well, demonstrating the reason for the failure of establishment of any radical common front. It is interesting to note that no differentiation was made in the beginning between the European and American exponents of anarchism. Tucker considered theirs a common fight against reaction at first, and gave the activities, especially of the Russians, a great amount of publicity and sympathy. Tucker personally gave evidence of having been strongly influenced by Michael Bakunin's God and the State, which he sold in its French edition until exhausted, then translated it into English, a landmark in anarchist propaganda. I'm going to mess up this next lady's last name because I don't really speak Russian. The picture of Sophie Peretskova, whatever, assassin of Tsar Nicholas II, was prominently displayed on the first page of Liberty's initial issue. And an undisguised program of apology for the actions of the Russian nihilists was featured for over 3 years thereafter. The enthusiasms, I bet I could actually pronounce that name, never mind. Never mind. Leave it. Just leave it. Like a dog chasing its tail. Anyways, the enthusiasm for Peter Kropotkin was no less marked, as well as for Elisee Reclus and Kropotkin's Swiss anarchist paper, Les Revoltes. Tucker regarded them as, quote, among the most prominent anarchists in Europe, and the paper, quote, the most scholarly anarchist journal in existence. He devoted the whole issue of Liberty on February 17th of 1883 to the trial of Lyons, France of Kropotkin. Oh, Lyon. I'm sorry. Oh, God. The trial in Lyons, France, of Kropotkin and 51 fellow anarchists, an event which he accused the English language press of covering up. Anarchism knows no frontiers, he declared, prophesying grave troubles if the Russian ex-nobleman and his compatriots were convicted. Numerous other prominent continental revolutionaries of anarchist persuasions received publicity and friendly support from Tucker. Tucker wrote an indignant condemnation of the Italian government when the anarchist Amilcare Capriani received a 25-year prison sentence in the spring of 1882. The rise of the Italians Enrico Malatesta and Carlo Caffriero as an anti-statist journalist was noted with pleasure, and widespread attention was given to the Paris trial of another woman of note among their number, Louise Michel. Or Michel. I don't know how freaking French people pronounce stuff. Tucker personally undertook the establishment of a Boston fund collection agency for a group of Russian nihilist refugees in Paris, led by Vera Sasilich and Pierre Lavrov. He welcomed the arrival of the United States of Leo Hartman, who was the instigator of the so-called Moscow mine conspiracy. He even saw fit to speak approvingly of the entry at New York of his subsequent bitter enemy, Johann Most, the fiery German instigator. Dazzled temporarily by the very concept of rebellion, Tucker's defense of its many facets was indiscriminate for some time, despite an indication that he already noticed differences, and occasionally mildly reproved the sanction of certain courses by the Europeans. We're getting there. Tucker said, "It is reverence for office that has kept and still nurtures that foul ulcer, tsardom, on the face of humanity, which the nihilists alone are ready to tear out by the roots and bury out of sight forever. Success to the nihilists. They are the only men and women in Russia who do not assent." End quote. Tucker justified the use of dynamite as a measure in self-defense. He reduced the whole conduct of the struggle with the Tsar's police to a contest of force used for oppression versus force used for resistance. And saw great potentialities in the publicity which the anarchist cause was obtaining through their propaganda of action, describing it as an investment of sacrificed tyrants. He went on to point out that the media previously closed to them were now accepting and publishing articles on socialism, anarchism, and communism, which had not long before been consigned to waste baskets. An enormous amount of investigation and discussion was the other prominent result, while the masses were gradually realizing, he believed, that emperors and prime ministers have no more right to murder their subjects than the latter have to murder them. Tucker met the revival of the International Working People's Association in London on July 16th of 1881 with undisguised enthusiasm, showing a special satisfaction over the reestablishment in accordance with strictly anarchist principles. A note of doubt tempered his ardor for the cause. Nevertheless, as he showed apprehension over the decision to subordinate the program of intellectual propaganda to that of direct action. He said, he warned a revolution to be permanent must first be mental. This observation did not prevent Tucker from strongly supporting the Socialist Revolutionary Congress held in Chicago on October 21st through the 23rd that same year for the purpose of forming an American Federation of the International Working People's Association. He recommended that all socialistic groups weary of compromise and desiring to accomplish the social revolution by means other than political action. That he says that they should send notice of attending to August Spies or Spies, J.H. Swain, Liberty's representative at the meeting, reported a cordial reception of Josiah Warren's American Socialism, and also the selection of Liberty as the English language organ of the new group. Two events in America were to shatter the solidarity which did exist between the Tuckerites and the Europeans. One of these was the ill-fated Pittsburgh Anarchist Congress of October of 1883, and the other, the Haymarket Affair. These occurrences split the anti-statists asunder, and a reconciliation on any basis at all never took place thereafter. The steps which led to the widening of the breach between the two wings deserve close attention, since the theoretical dispute has been carried on in their respective journals to this day. Although Tucker later interpreted anarchism of the period after 1880 as a revolt against state socialism, and the twofold path taken by anarchists as a result of the Duration Federation meeting of the same year, the American incidents accomplished the separation of the Tuckerite anti-authoritarians from the Kropotkians. The arrival of the most guy in America signaled the beginning of the energetic anarchist press advocating the program of European social revolutionaries, with the stress of inflammatory addresses and exhortations to violence. The most sensational of these was the German language paper Freiheit, edited by Most himself in New York. A second was The Alarm, published by A.R. Parsons in Chicago. A third was Truth, emanating from San Francisco under the direction of Burnett G. Haskell. Along with Kropotkin's revolt, these formed the intellectual fare of a growing number of radicals whose bent was in the direction of direct action. This, in addition to the avowed support of reorganization of society along communal lines of decentralism, alienated Tucker and other American individualists who found the attempt to specify formulae for social organization extremely distasteful. Although favoring the discarding of political states, Tucker was convinced that free choice was the only basis for determining the new social order. It was his belief that the cardinal plank of social revolutionaries should be that in all subsequent social cooperation, no manner of organization or combination whatsoever shall be binding upon any individual without his consent. And to decide in advance upon a communal structure violated this maxim from the start. The attempt of Haskell to bring about a convention which would succeed in reconciling the various schools of socialists, as Tucker phrased it, was described by the latter as perhaps the most foolishly inconsistent piece of work that ever came to our notice. A few days before the scheduled date of meeting, October 14th, 1833, Tucker advised the individualists through the columns of Liberty that they should exercise great caution in examining any document brought before the group before indicating assent by signing. He called Haskell's plan specious and plausible, but resolutely stated that he would not be a partner to such a quote-unquote marriage. This brought to a head a controversy between the two, which had begun at an earlier time, when Tucker had berated Haskell's policy of printing long excerpts from the works of Marx, Proudhon, Bakunin, and other socialists and anarchists without any attempt at discrimination or interpretation, in the hope of creating the impression of the essential sameness. The split with Haskell was never healed. Anarchist journals lined up along the theoretical lines of individualists or communists thereafter, with occasional concessions to the views of the other side. Tucker gave his rivals plenty of space and liberty, but no longer shared any exhilaration over their struggle. Now he became careful to point out any doctrinal differences to a most painful degree, as for example at the time of the publication of Elise Reculus's An Anarchist of Anarchy. At this time also began his continued emphasis on the primacy, from the point of view of time, of the American or mutualist anarchists. Newer opposition anarchist papers spoke of Tucker as the Pope of the movement, although occasionally there were organs of anarchist communism which took no offense at his stand. Said one, "Tucker is a logical man, and as long as he retains his present opinion of communism, he can't logically call us anarchists." Certainly no paper that I know of has exposed the shams, humbugs, and crimes of our present miscalled social order more ruthlessly than the Liberty. The circumstances connected with the Haymarket affair completed the job of destroying the ties between Tucker, the Americans, and the revolutionary groups of both native, small n, and immigrant origin. The rift developed somewhat in advance of 1886, despite Tucker's original glance of favor at the arrival of Most from England. Most is a guy, it's not about a group or whatever. The arrival of Most from England, where he had been recently imprisoned. It was Henry Appleton, an editorial associate of Tucker, who led the attack upon both Haskell and Most. Appleton named them specifically as leaders of a class ranting enthusiasts who falsely called themselves anarchists. That's a direct quote from Appleton. And they who never had repudiated the idea upon which the state had been founded. Wow, what a claim. They proposed to follow the overthrow by violence of the existing order with the establishment of even more repressive centralization. Most he dismissed as a quack masquerading as an anarchist, opposed to the prevailing system, but wishing to supplant it by a machine backed by force of his own particular brand. Sincerely convinced, as was Tucker, that human institutions had to evolve and should be allowed to do so, Appleton charged that Most, no more than other believers in government, wanted to institute he condemned communism of all types as, quote, at war with nature, end quote, and the natural enemy of anarchism. Most, he declared, occupied a ridiculous position, a communist sailing under the flag of anarchism is as false a figure as could be invented. Wow, Tucker, you're winning me over, buddy. Up to the eve of the Chicago tragedy, Tucker had refrained from taking the initiative of the intellectual struggle between the two factions, despite his assumption of responsibility for Appleton's attacks. On March 27th of 1886, however, Tucker came out with a full-page condemnation of Most and the New York Germans. He accused Most of shielding the fact that the German section of the IWPA, that's the International Working People's Association, and members of the Social Revolutionary Group were setting fire to their property for the purposes of collecting the insurance premiums. He called upon every honorable newspaper in the country, especially those of anarchists, to place this matter before their readers and declared that it was up to most to repudiate these arsonists and sever their connections with Fierheit in the interests of the movement. Lashed Tucker, quote, "It is one of the thing to kill the Tsar of Russia. It is quite another to set fire to a tenement house containing hundreds of human beings." End quote. The incident created a tremendous scandal in radical circles, and the public press received it avidly. Despite most's denial of any relation to the matter and countercharges of petty motives in making the expose, Tucker held to his original stand tenaciously. On April 17th, he replied, "I have nothing to retract. On the contrary, I reiterate all my charges as emphatically as before." He felt that he would be vindicated by subsequent investigation, which for the most part did substantially corroborate the charges made in Liberty. It was in this atmosphere of perturbation that the bomb-throwing incident took place, followed by the arrest of the celebrated defendants in Chicago and Most himself in New York, all of whom bore the taint of close association with the inflammatory German language revolutionary press. Tucker's sympathy for the accused men pushed aside all other considerations for the time being. Rushing to the defense of Most as quickly as he had condemned him for 4 weeks earlier, he described the latter as a victim of authority-ridden maniacs, and professed to be far more impressed by the violence of agencies of the state than by the actions of the Chicago communists, especially noting the severe condemnation of the clergy, newspapers, and police. Shameful in the savagery of their reaction, is what Tucker said of the clergy, newspapers, and police. In other affairs connected with the case, Tucker was inclined to disbelief of both the stories of the police and of August Spies, Fielden, and Albert Parsons. Convinced that the accused were innocent, he advanced the opinion to the person who had thrown the deadly bomb had been seeking an opportunity to do so, since it was not customary to carry such arms on one's person. Thus, the argument that the absence of the police provocation would have prevented its discharge was an unwarranted assumption. Despite his great respect for Spies and Parsons, Tucker believed that Adolf Fischer alone of the 8 accused men was an anarchist, and the others were merely state socialists masquerading as such. Okay, so the Haymarket Affair was something that happened in Chicago, and it's thought to be a false flag operation, and it was basically like a strike or I've had a long day. What the fuck word am I thinking of? It's thought to be like a strike or whatever. And somebody threw a bomb, like a homemade bomb, so into the crowd, and it didn't go well after that. Anyway, a protest. It was a protest. Why was I having such trouble thinking of that word? So yeah, it's thought to be a false flag attack that happened, and so at the time, a lot of workers around the country were, again, as we've talked about in previous installments of this series, the rise of, say, what they called socialism then, and what we might even still call socialism now, which I am personally not an advocate for. But you have to understand that the rise of socialism at a certain time in this country, at least, and maybe even in other countries, was because of the rise of industry. And what people were worried about was that instead of being slaves out in a field because of the 13th Amendment and everything like that, making everybody, instead of bringing the lower people up, it kind of brought everybody, at an equal level. It in fact did instill like a certain amount of equity among the people. And with the Industrial Revolution coming about, working conditions were horrible. This is why we have, workers' unions and everything like that. That's the birthplace of all the unions, and the birthplace of socialism is an industry. So yeah, people were pretty upset about being made into slaves. So yeah, you see protests and strikes and the formation of unions, and even in the Haymarket affair, a false flag attack, somebody throwing a bomb, and all the it was a fiery but mostly peaceful protest. Let's continue here, and hopefully we can wrap up pretty soon. Okay, so Benjamin Tucker was, in fact, far more interested in the psychological problem which the actions of the Chicago revolutionaries and presented the radical cause as a whole. The general inadvisability of armed revolt, the day of which he believed was gone forever due to the ease with which it could be suppressed, he considered amply proven. There was no doubt in his mind as to the righteousness of resistance to the oppression by recourse to violence, but his concern now was with its expedience. He said, "Bloodshed in itself is pure loss." Now he was absolutely convinced that the desired social revolution would be possible only through the utility of peaceful propaganda and passive resistance. For to use violence was merely to mark time, historically, hence the lack of vigor in defending the Haymarket group. Where he says, the Chicago communists have chosen the violent course, and the result is to be foreseen. Their predicament is due to a resort to methods that liberty emphatically disapproves. As between them and the state, liberty's sympathies are with them, but as they, by their folly, are doing their utmost to help the state, liberty cannot work with them or devote much energy to their defense. Tucker's actual conduct belied his negative declarations. Few radical publications devoting as much space to the defense of accused men as did Liberty. Copious references to the case continued to appear for over 10 years thereafter, and he never discarded his conviction that the men were innocent. His only reproach was on the grounds of the incendiary language of their literature and journals, which was a direct invitation to the state to retaliate in the manner which had been transpired. The feud with Johann Most continued unabated after the latter's release from jail, and the bitterness toward Most never disappeared from his writing. Tucker said, the revolutionary communism which Most had preached is as far removed from anarchism as Catholicism. While observed Tucker, while Most labeled the individualist philosophy as Tuckerism. It was Most's conviction that Tucker, by his instance upon private property, was sanctioning the exploitation of labor, since he did not think the concept compatible with mass production. Although his rejection of Tucker's esteemed mutual banking scheme, such attitudes earned him a degree of coolness which survived him, and which the newcomers Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman inherited and felt as long as Tucker continued active in radical journalism. Tucker's condemnation of the programs of Most and Kropotkin was far milder than the protracted assault aimed at the various groups of Marxian and other socialists. Some degree of common ground was shared with the former. The latter he considered a diametrically opposite of everything the anti-statist represented. The voluntary communism possible under Kropotkin, he thought, far superior than than that championed by Marx and Lassalle. In an economic sense, he thought Proudhon eminently right in describing Marxian socialism as, quote, the religion of poverty, end quote. So great was his fear of the state as an engine in the hands of a group seeking to bring about nationalization that he refused to concede anything in favor of socialism beyond the intelligence and good intentions of the men advocating it. In actuality, he looked upon anarchism as a branch of the general socialist movement and was inclined at one time to less sharply define the antagonistic elements the opposite wings incorporated. Anarchism, declared Tucker, was the doctrine that all affairs of men should be managed by individuals or voluntary associations, and that the state should be abolished. Anarchism is for liberty, and neither for nor against anything else. Socialism, on the other hand, was the belief that the next important step in progress is a change in man's environment of an economic character that shall include the abolition of every privilege whereby the holder of wealth acquires an anti-social power to compel tribute. Thus, the battle of socialism was with usury, that of anarchism with authority, and the two tended to overlap. State socialism, however, was an altogether different matter. The emphasis here swung around from strategy to tactics, ending up with the centering of all economic production and exchange in the hands of the state. Thus, the movement for socialization became a drive for nationalization by compulsion. Such a conclusion was inevitable if one were kept in mind the fact that the state, according to the anarchist, was a coercive institution in the very embodiment of the concept of invasion. Hence, to utilize the state or the government of the state to affect the objectives of socialism was to promote a campaign of physical force as the means whereby it might be done. A system of government-managed monopolies supported by compulsory taxation was a potentiality Tucker contemplated with considerable pain. Thus, Tucker from time to time severely criticized such widely separated exponents of socialism and nationalization as Edward Bellamy, Lawrence Grunland, and Daniel de Leon, at times when their names appeared prominently or when irritated by a serious discussion of their proposals. Generally disturbed by the content of their ideas, he did not incline to indulge in personal diatribes, and his fairness to even implacable opponents was evident. One prominent example was his treatment of Karl Marx. In a full-page summary of the latter's importance in the radical movement following his death, Tucker declared that the case of labor has lost one of the most faithful friends it ever had, and that every anarchist was bound to hold his memory in respect. Marx, he declared, however, was the most bitter of all enemies of anarchism, and the anarchists would henceforth continue to regard him as such, and that no one more than he, quote, represented the principle of authority which we live to combat, end quote. Willing to concede his importance as a progenitor of socialism, Tucker refused to accept him as an original thinker and offered to present specific proof of Proudhon's primacy in a consideration of any portion of Das Kapital. Convinced that the labor unions and labor press were exaggerating the importance of Karl Marx as the originator of economic principles on which all brands of socialism, including the anarchist variety, were based, Tucker insisted that Proudhon be placed in the foremost position by anti-government group. For their benefit, he presented a brief comparison of the two to illustrate why Proudhon deserved their consideration. He goes on, he said, the vital difference between Proudhon and Marx is to be found in the respective remedies which they proposed. Marx would nationalize the productive and distributive forces. Proudhon would individualize and associate them. Marx would make the laborers political masters. Proudhon would abolish political mastership entirely. Marx would abolish usury by having the state lay violent hands on all industry and business and conduct it on the cost principle. Proudhon would abolish usury by disconnecting the state entirely from industry and business and forming a system of free banks, which would furnish credit at cost to every industrious and deserving person, and thus place the means of production within the reach of all. Marx believed in compulsory majority rule. Proudhon believed in the voluntary principle. Although oversimplified, the comparison between anarchism and socialism was typical of the several similar presentations which he made in order to illustrate the fundamental cleavage between the two. This he probably did best of all in his State, Socialism, and Anarchism, How Far They Agree and Wherein They Differ, written for public consumption shortly after the Haymarket explosion to vindicate individualists from imputations of violence or revolutionary intentions. If Tucker's indictment of the various apostles of collectivism was severe, it was no more so than that of the modified individualism of Henry George and his followers, and no more protracted dispute took place than that between Tucker and his associates and the many articulate Georgists. That's funny. As with Marx, if you know why I think that's funny, you're a friend. As with Marx, his concern at first was with the content of the single tax theories and Georgist economics, and not with personalities. Tucker conceded George's unusual ability and professed great esteem for him as a man, a writer, and a reformer. Considered the first two books of Progress and Poverty a stirring indictment of capital and a masterly riddling of Malthusian sophistry. But beyond that, he disagreed. Malthusian sophistry. He admitted George's literary style, singularly lucid and expository, and credited him with having done more to stimulate economic thought than any other writer in English language up to the time of his death. With large portions of George's doctrine, he was in violent disagreement, and these he raked over constantly, especially in the early 1880s. Ignoring the basis of most criticisms of George, Tucker spearheaded that of the anarchists, which centered around the fear of land nationalization resulting from the widespread adoption of a uniform land tax system. Tucker adhered to the argument that land had a legal and not a natural value. Therefore, in short, the course of action was not in supporting a scheme to tax the legal value, but in favor of abolishing those laws which established it. Anarchism holds that land belongs not to the people, but to the occupant and user. He asserted, as long as the occupant refrained from invading his neighbors, it was his right to do as he pleased with the land he occupied. The single tax advocates, on the other hand, punished by taxation anyone who did not, quote, use his land in accordance with the wishes of his neighbors, end quote. Tucker used the term rent as a synonym for ground rent, which anarchists considered an immoral tax. He occasionally applied it to house rent when monopolistic practices made the building of houses difficult and allowed owners of buildings to continue collecting rent in excess of the original cost of the building. The fundamental argument of anarchists with the Georgian concept of rent tax collection was its theory of its theory of the community. Quote, that there is an entity known as the community, which is the rightful owner of all land anarchists deny. I maintain the quote unquote, the community as a non-entity, that it has no existence and is simply a combination of individuals having no prerogatives beyond those of the individuals themselves. This combination of individuals has no better title to the land than any single individual outside it. Tucker maintained, and that was something Tucker wrote in Liberty, Volume 6, published October 27th of 1888. Tucker maintained that when exacting economic rent, the community was merely exercising its right of the strongest, and that there was no logical reason why it should stop here but not proceed on the complete socialism and the most minute regulation of individual conduct. Tucker goes on to say, it is absurd to maintain that if rent collection by government is proper, then interest collection, wages collection, and profit collection are not also logically proper. The major fault of the Georgian plan, according to Tucker, it sounds like he's describing what they used to call like property tax. The major fault of the Georgian plan, according to Tucker, was failure to determine the just basis of possession. Before beginning investigations of economics, it was not the Ricardian concept of varying degrees of fertility of various soils that accounted for rent, but the simple fact of monopoly. Affirming his complete accord with J.K. Engels, quote, who really favors free land, end quote, he announced, I oppose the land tax scheme because it would not make land free, but would simply make a change of landlords, and because it would enormously increase the power of a worse foe to labor than the landlord, namely the state. On other matters, Tucker also disagreed strongly with George, especially on finance, about which he thought the latter knew essentially nothing. He claimed that George had never been able to answer adequately his arguments that land was practically useless to labor which was unprovided with capital. Lack of money, he claimed, was far more important in hindering the production of wealth than inaccessibility of natural opportunities, he called it. Tucker, preoccupied with interest as a term for the payment upon the loan of capital, paid no attention to the Georgian explanation and differed from him by playing heavily upon the money question while relegating that of land to a subordinate possession. A personal element entered the question after the Haymarket case when Tucker bitterly condemned George for supporting rather than protesting the conviction of the defendants. He declared that George's Standard was the only labor paper to his knowledge which did not protest the Illinois Supreme Court decision in the anarchist trial, and suggested that the editor's hope of success in seeking political office had been the deciding factor in motivating him to go along with the court's verdict. For this reason, he scouted apologies for George's public behavior offered by supporters who mentioned his private plea that clemency be shown the condemned men. Tucker climaxed a 10-year disparagement of George by publishing in 1896, a year before the latter's death, the bitter Henry George Traitor, in which he set forth his objection to the single tax leader. The single tax leader for whom he now entertained a violent dislike. On the behavior of labor unions, Tucker had no hardened convictions. Alternately pleased and dissatisfied with their conduct, he was impressed more with their personalities than their operation in his time. Quote, labor unions are a crude step in the direction of supplanting the state, he declared, although severely critical of their organization, which he thought little different from that of any political organization in their utilization of the element of force and authority. Their movement in the future, he felt, involved a tendency, quote, for self-government on the part of the people, the logical outcome of which is ultimate revolt against those usurping political conspiracies, end quote, which he saw manifested in the judicial and legislative branches of the government. He justified strikes and believed capital always the instigator, but saw little chance of success for the strikers except through protracted, consolidated passive resistance. The hope of labor legislation of lasting nature he thought futile. He said, as long as labor is dependent upon capital, so long will it be outraged with impunity. Specifically, however, Tucker had nothing encouraging to say to union labor or its program. The Knights of Labor was a target of his abuse for some time prior to Haymarket, and the struggle for the 8-hour day was dismissed with a shrug. Speed-up techniques and similar tightening would soon dissipate what little might be gained by the shortening of hours, he thought. His real interest was the hope of observing the development of a union movement not founded. Not founded on compulsion, red tape, and parliamentary hocus pocus. And above all, avoiding all compromise with the state. Oops. All organization ideally should be predicated upon spontaneity, free agency, and choice, he declared. Yet even in their contemporary form, he willingly admitted unions were a potent sign of emancipation. On a wide variety of other issues, Tucker was notable for his negative stand. He was implacably opposed to the public school system, and curiously enough, as an atheist, became a defender of Roman Catholic parochial schools as a force which served to produce a real increase of freedom, to determine the nature of education on a private basis. He looked upon women's suffrage with contempt. It will be a cold day for liberty when woman takes the reins of power. He commented disparagingly on observing the militancy of the movement. Another of his I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting that part. Another of his antipathies was compulsory taxation for community services such as street repairs, waterworks, sewerage facilities, and fire and police departments, regardless of the size of the community. He believed such needs could be provided for on the basis of voluntary contribution and with a smaller percentage of non-contributors than of delinquency of tax paying in the cities of the United States. One of Tucker's most aggravating stands was an outgrowth of his all-out struggle with the concept of authority. He stood fast by the assertion that children were labor products of the mother, not creatures with a separate and unique catalog of rights. Since he did not believe in the institution of marriage, and since he could not, as an anarchist, place the responsibility of the child upon society, this was his only remaining logical alternative. Eschewing sentimentality with and explaining his choice in terms of a labor product alienated several associates at a later time, among them J. William Lloyd. The religious radicals of free thought exponents of the Boston Liberal League, Thaddeus B. Wakeman, Horace Seaver, J.P. Mendham, and his earlier opponent Francis Abbott were constant targets for his barbs, especially for the tendency to overwork the word liberal, which, remarked Tucker, was a vague and much abused term. Their struggle against the church was really part of Liberty's campaign against the concept of authority, prodded Tucker, and to be really consistent, they should ally themselves with the anarchists. He was equally displeased with several other portions of reform of the reform front. Fundamental change, not reform, was Tucker's real interest. To adhere to the latter course, he said, was to abandon the plumb line for the corkscrew. Okay, so I think next week we'll conclude the book. Maybe we'll do it in 2 parts. I don't know. Maybe it'll take 2 more weeks. It'll really stretch the vocal cords. Wow, look at all this chat going on. A lot of nonsense in the chat tonight. Let's see. Let's do. I've read some Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse 5. Not a lot of Kerouac. Whatever. I can't pronounce his name right now. Have you read any beat writers? Kerouac, Ginsberg, or Burroughs? I wouldn't. If I ever got my hands on a Ginsberg book, I would burn it because he's a pedophile. Top-notch conversation we're having here, Jimbo. Yep. Who is this fucking kid? Oh, this is one of those kids I used to play video games with like a decade ago. This is really creepy. I haven't talked to this kid in a long time. I'm glad that you're tuning in. I hope you're getting something out of this. I do. I don't know. I don't know. Let's see. I can't really see it there. Never mind, we'll go back to here. Wow, he really he's just spamming the chat. This is not entertaining. How's Alan? Oh, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Let's see. Yeah, I don't really play much video games anymore. I do have a gaming channel, but I don't really do anything with it. Yeah, like a decade ago, I kind of did. I did play some video games like a decade ago. I can't believe you. This is so weird. I'm glad that you're here, man. I hope that I really do hope that you're getting something. I hope that you're finding some value out of what you're listening to here at Voluntaryist Academy. I'm trying to respect the chat here. Probably in the weeds here a little bit. Can I have you on to speak? Absolutely not. You are not coming on here to speak. I think you're honestly, after these, how many years? I haven't talked to you in almost 6 years. Oh, this is the kid. Oh, dude, you really are messing around. You're the kid that, You're the kid that went and tried to contact my wife on social media. I remember you. Yeah, dude. Seriously, you really need to find something better to do with your time than kind of troll me on my live stream. Again, I hope that you're learning something from this, but I really doubt it. And it's kind of sad that you have nothing else going on in your life, that you have to come after somebody who hasn't talked to you in half a decade. And this is a one-way conversation that's going to happen here. And I'm going to like find out how to block you on all this stuff and everything. Cause like, I don't think that you're here for the right reasons. I might let you keep coming. There's not a chance in hell that you'll ever be a member in my community. There's not a chance in hell that you'll ever be on my show to talk live on anything at all. I remember who you are now, and I'm not really impressed with you as a person. I think you're a low-life scumbag who's got really some deep-seated issues. And I think that you contacting my wife on social media like 6 years ago, you and your buddy there, like there was two of you that did it. You teamed up because you wanted to play video games with me. Like, we're 13, grow up, get a life, you know? So that's really, really funny that you're here tonight. You were in the chat last week too. Let's see. I know this is gold. So anyways, thank you, everybody who tuned in, including the trolls. It's funny. That's really funny. I'm glad that you stayed the whole time. Seriously. You know, I know how to track IP addresses, right? Like if you like contact me in any way, you know, I can find exactly where you are. Just letting you know. That's all I'm saying is I know how to find where you are. So if you contact me or my wife, I know where to find you. So anyways, Voluntaryist Academy. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Next week, same time, we're going to be coming back and making sure that we continue doing this and making sure that this project, this series gets finished up before the end of the month. I really hope I can stick it out next week. I mean, and then we'll be able to hopefully get it done. I don't know. It's like another like 50 pages, I think, which will probably have to be a two-parter. But anyways, go over to voluntaristacademy.com. Where is the button? I had a button. There we go. So yeah, you can go over to voluntaristacademy.com, check it out, and yeah, get some resources for yourself. You can get pretty much every single thing that I've read on this channel on a PDF. You can get, let's see, what's on this page? All the old episodes. I mean, you're already on the YouTube channel, so that's cool. If you want to support the channel, you can do so over here as well. All sorts of Bitcoin things, and you can become a member as well. $3 a month for the first 30 people. That's a pretty good deal. It's less than a cup of coffee. Most people, you know, spend that on a cup of coffee every day. You could give me $3 a month and come and hang out. And then, unless you're a troll, like this Desert Ranger fella. Yeah, you know what? Let's see. What can I do right now? I can remove them. Oh wait, no, that's remove the message. I'm getting in the weeds here. Anyways, what else do I have to say? Oh yeah, if you're listening on Spotify, come over to the YouTube channel and show some love over there. That way you can come to the live streams on Saturday nights. And yeah, I think that's it. I think that's going to be it. That's going to be it for tonight. Thank you, everybody. Remember, taxation is not just theft. Taxation is slavery. Stop paying it and see what happens. And you own yourself. You really do. You got to own yourself. You own your body. Want to send you guys off with some positivity and words of encouragement. Own yourself. Own your actions. Take responsibility for your actions and yourself. And if you can do that, then under natural law, with with a dash of objective morality, you can really liberate your mind, and the body will follow. Until next time, I'm James Cordiner, and you've been watching Voluntaryist Academy. I love you all. Have a great week. Peace.